It's 4 o'clock hour. Ricky Thompson, former Baylor receiver, Washington receiver, sideline reporter for Baylor, joins us to start the hour as Oklahoma State wins 36-25. Baylor with the off week Thursday next week against the Mountaineers in Morgantown. Ricky, thank you. There were times early when Baylor had a chance to do something. There were a couple of plays later as well. What do you get the sense right now is happening with the running game? What are they missing right now in being that more physical and just kind of dictating the point of the game? What do you see right now?
Well, Smoke, I think it's a couple of things. I think, number one, you don't have Abram Smith back there. That was a guy that was 200-plus pounds, tough runner downhill, could run over people, and you miss that. There's no way around it. I think Richard Grease is a really good running back. I think he's developed. This guy's a true freshman, remember. But he and Squirrel are just two small, structured running backs, and you can't get that power game. In other words, you're not going to get the extra yard or two after contact with those guys generally. And I think that makes a difference. And I think it reflects into your guys up front and their confidence. And I think it's obviously a reflection on the way the game's called from the offensive coordinator standpoint and the plays that are called based on that.
Ricky, there were a lot of, mistakes, little things that piled up. How much of that is youth on this team, inexperience, and how much of it was the veterans on this team also just not being ready in the moment?
Well, I think it's some of both. I think if you had to pick one more than the other, you would say youth. I think that was pretty clear that there was still some big eyes out there and not a real comfort level on their part, and maybe that affects too how a game's called with those young guys there. And remember, you've got a lot of experience on the lines of scrimmage on both sides, but your playmakers on both sides are really inexperienced, and that's really a detriment, or has been thus far, the inexperience at those skill positions. And I think it's shown. I think it has, and in spite of that, guys, the way that game was played Saturday, the Bears had every chance to win that game. And, in fact, they were within 8 driving when they get the interception with a tip ball off a receiver's hands. And you just can't make those kinds of mistakes. You've got to pick those things. You win that game last Saturday, and you're in the driver's seat.
Yeah, it was a giant missed opportunity. It really was. Ricky, when Gavin Holmes, I know he wasn't the only one that had drops or whatever, but, he had obviously a couple plays in that game, not catching the football that were really costly when all was said and done. What do you do if you're Dallas Baker and Dave Aranda and Jeff Grimes and whoever talks to him, from the offensive staff? For a receiver, how do you get your kind of head back in the game and overcome that? Because he had the one catch, immediately right after that first drop, and you kind of felt like, okay, cool, he's back in the groove. And then he had, obviously another couple later on. But how do you address that, I guess is what I'm asking.
Well, the only way I've seen it addressed in the past, and I played out there, so I know a little bit about it. But I think if you're going to play him, which I think you have to, I think he's one of your key guys. You keep throwing it to him. And at West Virginia, I throw it to him on the first play of the game. You've got to overcome that type mentality. You've got to catch the ball. You've got to do it in critical situations. And I can tell you, nobody feels worse about those than Gavin. And one of them was a first down on a drive that probably ends up in point. The second one goes off for an interception that puts Oklahoma State in field goal position, which ends up really being the ball game when you go up by 11 at that point. So you make those two plays, you kick 2 balls into the end zone, and I think you've got a different score. And that's in spite of a lot of mistakes during that game. But you take those 4 plays away and you win the game.
Noah Rauschenberg has been fantastic with what he's done with kickoffs. It's almost like you just almost take it for granted. Up where we sit in the press box, we're higher, and I felt maybe kind of a swirling wind. The 2 returns were from the south end zone. Do you feel like Baylor was trying to pin Oklahoma State deep with their coverage, or do you feel like that the wind affected his kicking?
I think it's got to be the wind, because we've seen that kid, and it's generally not 3 or 4 yards deep in the end zone. It's generally out the back of the end zone. And I think if you watch those flags, it was misleading. They were blowing slightly. The flags on the goalpost weren't moving at all. I could feel a breeze down on the field. I think it had to have something to do with it. But I think, too, if you notice, he generally drives the ball, and both those kicks had some air under them. And I think with the air he put under the ball and the swirling wind, I think that's why those balls didn't go out.
Well, I don't know if this is, kind of defends your point here, Smokey, about the wind. Something happened to me that's never happened. We sat in those seats, or at least close to there, since the opening of McLean Stadium. That's where we sit in the press box. When the pyrotechnics went off at the beginning of the game, they blew onto me in the press box. Like there was
some of the
ash.
smoke and
yeah,
ash.
Some of the ash did. And I thought, well, that's weird.
Yeah.
And then I didn't think anything of it until just now when you asked that question.
Yeah, and I do think it's swirled at times, but I do feel like it from where we are, which is near the goal line on the north end zone, up pretty high, it did seem to be a pretty good breeze, and some people disagree with me on the message board, but I wanted to get it from your perspective. Ricky Thompson with us, Baylor sideline reporter on 365 Sports. Craig?
Ricky, obviously, Shapen had the 2 picks. The one was, obviously a deflected pass, but the other one just kind of felt like he got baited into that one along the sidelines late. Overall, though, I mean, throws for well over 300 yards. What did you think of Blake Shapen and how he performed?
I thought Blake was fine. I think on that second interception, and I may be way off here, I think he may have been trying to pull the receiver back into a back shoulder type throw, and he didn't see the ball coming, which made it an easy interception. Or he may have been baited. I'm not sure. But I just think otherwise we're still talking about a quarterback that really doesn't have a lot of experience. And I'm really liking what I'm seeing about Blake sitting back in the pocket with some patience. He didn't do that at BYU. I think these last games, he stands back there. He waits for the guy. I mean, and the blocking up front, too. You got to speak about that. But there were several times when I thought he sat back there and really found a second receiver for big plays. I think there's a couple of times when he missed open people. But considering the experience, I know we all know he's got the arm. I just think Blake's going to be fine. I think he's going to get better and better. I think he's playing okay now, and I don't think you'll see anything but improvement out of Blake.
As a wide receiver, go ahead, Paul.
Go ahead.
As a wide receiver, obviously they needed people to step up. We saw Presley make a play on the road against Iowa State, among others. But what are your thoughts about what Monterey Baldwin has done and what he did on Saturday?
Well, let's just go to one of those plays, and that was the 4th down touchdown catch. That was as good a throw and catch as you'll ever see. That was on tight coverage. Blake put it the only place he possibly could where Monterey could catch it and the defender couldn't get his hands on it. And then secondly, that was in a bit of a crowd. He caught that ball, and then he takes it to the house. Some of those things you saw on that play aren't coachable. And that's where difference makers come in. I think you've got to get it to him more and more. And I think if these other receivers see those plays made, it affects their game too. But I think that's one of the spots where we've been a little short is playmakers outside in these first few games. And those 2 deep balls to Monterey were game changers.
Ricky, they've got 10 days to get ready to do something that they have not done yet, which is win in Morgantown, West Virginia. Now, this is a West Virginia team that's, trying to find itself right now. What do they have to do to make sure they don't fall into a trap next Thursday in Morgantown?
Well, I think this loss Saturday will prevent any kind of trap because they know they have to win. It doesn't matter who they're playing. And just the fact you're going to a place you've never won. So I think the trap's out of it. I just think they're going to have to be able to handle another hostile road crowd at night in Morgantown. I promise you it'll be loud Thursday night or not. So I think they're going to have to overcome that. But I think the thing you tell these guys, you win this game, you're 4-2, you're 2-1 in league play. You're in the same spot you were last year with one loss to Oklahoma State, and a lot of the games out there that you should win if you play your game. So they've got everything in front of them, and I do think we're back, guys, like the Iowa State game, to another key game on the road that they have to win.
Yeah, no doubt about that, Ricky. One of the things that I guess was surprising to me was just kind of the way the energy felt, and it was something that Aranda talked about as far as the beginning of the game and kind of that first half. And he attributes some of that to youth, but I don't know. Like I'm seeing the guys in the post game that are talking, and I'm seeing a lot of the players out there. There's a lot of veterans on this team. Now I realize they lost a lot of leaders, but did you get any sort of sense about a lack of energy, a lack of a buzz early on? And as a former player, like what do you kind of attribute that to, and how do you go about trying to correct that?
Well, yeah, I think everybody felt it. I think there's a fact that even Coach Aranda addressed it in the postgame that really that intense atmosphere on our part wasn't there initially, and that's unacceptable. I think it was unacceptable to Aranda. It ought to be unacceptable to these players. You can't do that in any game, much less a game like Oklahoma State. You got to be ready to go, because I think we found out in this one that maybe you can lose one in the first half. We weren't in good shape going in at 16-3, and then you get the kickoff returned and you're down 23-3 just like that. And I think some of that was lack of intensity early. So I'm just guessing there'll be a big part of this next 10 days spent on intensity and coming out ready to play and not losing a game early just because you weren't ready to play.
Ricky, okay, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. I was just going to say on the road, that's even more important.
I think that for someone like Dave Aranda, who's so good, and maybe even we look at the way he reads people, players, whatever. All coaches have their unique part of being able to do that, some better than others. But I almost felt like in the post game with us, the media, after the game, it seemed like that bothered him a lot. That almost hurt him, that he may have misread his team throughout the week.
Well, I think so too. And I don't know if we were having some technical problems. So I did the post-game interview with the coach, and I can tell you that it bothered him. I think it was a combination of maybe him thinking a big part of that's on him, and a big part of it that he just missed it and didn't realize it. And with that, I'm going to be shocked if they don't come out with a buzz in Morgantown on Thursday night. A week from this coming Thursday. I don't think he lets that happen again.
They lost a game last year at about the same time in Stillwater to Oklahoma State, and they got beat up in that game, although it was a very winnable game, but they got beat up. They didn't lose, and then they, of course, had the disaster in Fort Worth. These are two losses early against two quality teams, two teams, one in the top 10, one that's in the top 15 or so. What is the message you think going forward, the leaders of this team? Because they still have a chance to pull themselves out of this, but they're also teetering on scratching and clawing to be a bowl team.
Well, I think the message from these guys like Dylan Doyle and the veterans that are out there, some of these linemen, Afu, whoever it may be, is you tell these guys, look, same place we were in last year, same position, one loss in the conference early, but we finished up winning all but one football game. We can do that again, or we can tank. And this next game is going to go a long way in determining which one of those happens. Either we lose this one, we're 1-2 in the league, 3-3. It could get ugly from there. So I think that's the message. And I think guys like Dylan can step up and prevent that from happening, because I mean, guys, it's right there. I mean, even these two games that they've lost were games that they didn't necessarily get beat up. They just screwed up, and there's a big difference. So there's a chance to win out. I think we've seen Oklahoma, man, they're struggling. Texas is okay. Kansas, 5-0, but they're beatable. I mean, Iowa State should have beat them last week, just didn't do it. Missed 3 kicks. Kansas State, they're okay, but they lose at home to Tulane. I mean, it's right there, guys. We just got to play football.
Thank you, Ricky. Appreciate your time. Ricky Thompson, Baylor sideline reporter, also former Baylor wide receiver with us, 365 Sports. There's not a game